The church was filled with silence, broken only by the sound of sniffles and the rustle of black clothes. The air was heavy with the smell of lilies, and I felt my chest tighten as I looked at the polished coffin at the front. My father-in-law was gone. He had been more of a father to me than my own, and it hurt more than I could say. I wiped a tear from my cheek and squeezed Daniel's hand, but he didn't squeeze back. I turned to him, hoping for comfort, but his face was hard, almost unreadable. No tears. No emotion. He sat with his back straight, eyes fixed ahead like he was waiting for something else entirely. My heart sank. Even now, at his own father's funeral, he seemed cold. People came forward to speak, sharing memories of a kind, generous man. I listened, my heart aching. Daniel's father had been warm, always welcoming me with a smile. He loved telling stories at the dinner table, and he treated me like his own daughter. Thinking about those moments made me bite my lip to stop the sob from breaking out. When the pastor finished the final prayer, a lawyer stepped forward. The entire room grew still, as though everyone had been waiting for this moment. I frowned, confused. Who talks about a will at a funeral? But the lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. The words seemed to echo in the church. All assets, all properties, all investments, every cent of the $450 million fortune, left to one person. Daniel. A ripple of gasps swept through the mourners. People leaned closer to each other, whispering with wide eyes. Some faces showed shock, others envy. The grief that had filled the room only minutes ago seemed to vanish, replaced by hunger and grief. I looked at Daniel. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. His jaw lifted, his chest swelled, and there was a glint in his eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sorrow. It was pride. Power. My stomach turned. Something inside him shifted right in front of me, and I felt it like a chill down my spine. The man sitting beside me was no longer the husband I thought I knew. I wanted to hold on to him, to remind him this was a day of mourning, but he didn't even glance at me. He didn't reach for my hand. He only stared straight ahead, as if the coffin no longer mattered. That was the moment I knew. Our lives had just changed forever, and not in a way I was ready for. When I first met Daniel, life was simple. We didn't have much, but we had enough. We lived in a small apartment with thin walls where we could hear the neighbors arguing, but we laughed about it and made the place our own. Daniel was in law school then, buried in books and late-night studying. I was working long shifts at a small marketing firm, saving every dollar we could. Back then, he would always tell me, "One day, Elena, all this will pay off. One day, we'll live better." I believed him. I believed in him so strongly that I started letting go of my own dream. I had always wanted to climb high in my career, maybe even run my own company one day. But Daniel needed me. He needed someone to cook, to support him, to keep the bills paid while he studied. I told myself love was about sacrifice, and so I gave mine freely. We built a life on teamwork. Every time he passed an exam, we celebrated with cheap takeout pizza, sitting cross-legged on the floor because we didn't even own a dining table. Those nights were precious. I would watch his tired eyes light up with hope, and I'd tell myself it was all worth it. When Daniel finally graduated, I was the loudest one clapping at the ceremony. His father was there too, proud and smiling. I remember the way he shook my hand and whispered, "You held him up when he couldn't stand. Never forget your part in this story." From that day, his father became a second father to me. He saw me. He respected me. Our marriage started with that same energy, two people building from scratch. We bought a small house, not fancy, but it was ours. Daniel worked long hours at the law firm, and I picked up part-time work. Sometimes we barely saw each other, but whenever we did, he'd hold me tight and say, "I'm doing this for us, Elena." But even then, I noticed cracks forming. Daniel was proud. Too proud. He hated when others succeeded faster than him. At dinner parties, I could see the way he compared himself to his colleagues, always pushing to prove he was smarter, more ambitious. I told myself it was just drive, that hunger was normal. But sometimes it felt like he was chasing something bigger than us. His father, on the other hand, was different. He was gentle, kind, and wise. He never bragged about money, though I knew he had plenty. At family dinners, he'd sit at the head of the table, laughing and telling stories from his younger days. He'd ask me about my family, my work, even my hobbies. He was the type of man who made everyone feel seen. Sometimes I felt closer to him than to Daniel. He filled the gap Daniel left when ambition pulled him away. I can still see those dinners clearly. The clinking of glasses, the smell of roasted chicken, the sound of his father's laughter echoing through the house. Those moments made me believe everything was fine. They made me forget the small loneliness I felt when Daniel came home too tired to talk, or when he brushed off my worries with a sharp, "Elena, not now." I told myself it was just the price of success. I told myself our love was stronger than these cracks. And deep down, I held on to hope. Hope that once Daniel had everything he dreamed of, we would finally settle into the life we always imagined. I never thought the very thing he was chasing would be the thing that broke us. After the will was read, Daniel was not the same man I knew. At first, I thought it was the shock of losing his father and suddenly carrying so much responsibility, but as the days passed, I began to see it clearly. He pulled away from me. He stopped talking late into the night the way we used to. He no longer asked about my day. It was as if I had become invisible. Instead of coming home after work, Daniel stayed out late. He said it was business dinners or networking events, but I noticed the way he carried himself when he walked through the door, confident, almost arrogant, like someone who no longer needed to explain himself. Money began to pour into our lives, and Daniel wasted no time showing it. He bought a brand new sports car, the kind that roared down the street, turning heads everywhere. He hired decorators to redo our home, tearing apart the cozy little space we had built together. When I told him the changes felt too much too soon, he laughed and said, "Elena, you've been living small for too long. It's time you learned how the rich live." The words cut deep. Living small. That small life was the one we had built with sweat and sacrifice. But now Daniel made it sound cheap, like it was beneath him. Soon, strangers began filling our home. Men in sharp suits, women in glittering dresses, people I had never met before. They called themselves his friends, but I could see they were only there because of his money. They laughed too hard at his jokes, clinked their glasses too eagerly, and whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. When I sat at the edge of the gathering, Daniel barely acknowledged me. Once, when I tried to join their conversation, he placed a hand on my arm and said in front of everyone, "Elena, this isn't really your crowd. Go relax." They all laughed softly, and I felt myself shrinking inside. Then came the lawyers. One evening, I found papers on his desk, documents about separating finances, trusts, accounts I didn't even know existed. My chest tightened as I flipped through them. He hadn't said a word to me about this. When I asked, his face was cold. "It's just business, Elena. This money is complicated, and I need to protect it." "Protect it from me?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He only walked away. I began to hear whispers outside our home too. Friends told me they had seen Daniel at expensive restaurants, always with company. Sometimes a group, sometimes just one woman. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but the way people looked at me when they spoke, with pity in their eyes, told me otherwise. One night, I gathered the courage to confront him. He had just come home, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling, "where have you been? And don't say business. I'm not blind. You're shutting me out. You're treating me like I don't belong in your life anymore." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Elena, don't be dramatic. You wouldn't understand the circles I'm moving in now. Stop making everything about you." The words felt like a knife. The man who once begged me to believe in him, who once held me through sleepless nights of study and stress, now looked at me as if I were nothing more than a burden. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My heart ached with a truth I could no longer ignore. The money had poisoned him. It had poisoned us. And the marriage I once thought unshakable was slowly slipping through my fingers. Daniel's arrogance grew with every passing week. The man who once leaned on me for support now acted like I was beneath him. He spoke to me with sharpness, as if every word I said annoyed him. If I questioned his late nights, he would roll his eyes and mutter, "You wouldn't understand." If I asked about money, he snapped, "You never earned it, so don't worry about it." At first, I tried to stay calm, to remind myself of the love we once shared. I cooked his favorite meals, tried to talk to him gently, but he no longer cared. The distance between us became a wall, and behind that wall, he built a new life I wasn't allowed into. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, I found something I wasn't meant to see. A receipt tucked into a folder, a luxury hotel, one I knew we had never visited together. My hands trembled as I traced the date. It was a night he had told me he was stuck in a late meeting. A second paper slipped out, this one for expensive jewelry. Not for me. My stomach dropped. My heart raced with a mixture of rage and despair. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The whispers I had heard, the perfume that lingered on his clothes, the coldness in his eyes, it all fit together now. When I confronted him that night, I held the receipt in my hand. "Daniel, who was with you at the Grand Marlow Hotel?" His eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. A smirk played on his lips. "Elena, don't go looking for things you can't handle." I felt my knees weaken. "So it's true." He poured himself a glass of whiskey, calm as ever. "You should be grateful, Elena. Do you realize the life you're living now? The cars, the house, the parties? Most women would give anything to be in your place. Don't ruin it with jealousy." His words stung worse than the truth itself. He wanted me silent, obedient, a pretty shadow beside him while he lived however he pleased. Things only grew worse when his family turned against me. At dinners, his cousins whispered behind napkins, throwing me sharp looks. His mother pulled me aside once and said, "You should count your blessings, Elaine. Don't forget you married into this family with nothing. Don't be ungrateful." I wanted to scream. Ungrateful? I had sacrificed my career, my dreams, years of my life supporting Daniel when he had nothing. I had been there when his family barely noticed him. And now, because of his inheritance, they called me a gold digger. The breaking point came at a charity gala. It was supposed to be an evening of grace and unity, but for me, it was humiliation. Daniel arrived in a custom-tailored suit, all smiles for the cameras. He barely spoke to me, only holding my arm like I was an accessory. Throughout the night, he laughed and whispered with another woman, tall, elegant, dressed in red. He didn't bother to hide it. When I tried to speak to him, he brushed me off. "Not now, Elena. You're embarrassing yourself." His words were loud enough for people nearby to hear. I saw the pity in their eyes, the smirks on some faces. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I went to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and cried quietly, careful not to ruin my makeup. Looking in the mirror afterward, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale face, red eyes, lips trembling. Where had I gone? Where was the woman who once believed in love, in partnership, in sacrifice? At home, the fights grew sharper. Daniel began talking about protecting assets. He spoke casually about divorce, as though I were just a name on a piece of paper he could erase. "You'll get something, don't worry," he said once with a cruel smile. "But don't expect half. That's not happening." My chest burned with rage. How could he dismiss me like that after everything I had given him? But fear crept in too. If he really divorced me and turned his lawyers against me, what would I have left? Who would believe me over him, the rich and powerful lawyer with all the connections? One night, unable to carry the weight alone, I called Maya, my closest friend. She had been worried for me for months, always asking if I was okay. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea in my hands, I finally broke down. "He's cheating, Maya," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I found proof, and he's already talking about divorce. His family, they all think I'm some gold digger." Maya leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Elena, you can't let him destroy you like this. You gave him everything. Don't you dare walk away with nothing. You need to start protecting yourself. Gather evidence. Every receipt, every document, every message. Don't let him paint the story his way." Her words struck something in me. For so long, I had been shrinking, silencing myself, letting Daniel's power crush me. But that night, a spark lit inside. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I went home and sat in the dark, listening to the sound of Daniel laughing on the phone in the next room. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "He may think I'm weak, but he has no idea what I'm capable of." And for the first time in months, I felt a small piece of my strength return. I didn't have to dig for long before the truth showed itself. One evening, Daniel left his briefcase on the dining table and went upstairs to take a call. My hands shook as I opened it, but something inside me told me I needed to know. Inside were files, contracts, and letters. One folder stood out, a stack of papers dated months before his father's death. I read every word, and each one cut me open. Daniel had already been working with lawyers to separate his finance. The documents listed my name, not as a partner, but as a liability. He had made plans to keep every asset under his control, ensuring that if divorce happened, I would walk away with almost nothing. My breath caught in my throat. These papers weren't recent. They were from before the will was even read. Before he even knew he would inherit $450 million, he was already planning to leave me behind. I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. The realization sank in. He had used me. All those nights I stayed up making sure he ate, all the times I worked extra shifts to pay rent, all the sacrifices I made for his career. He had taken them all, knowing one day he would cut me loose. He didn't just change after the inheritance. He had been preparing for this betrayal all along. That night, when he came downstairs, I waited for him in the living room with the papers spread across the table. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to hold his attention. "Care to explain this?" His eyes flicked to the documents, and for a second, I saw surprise. But then his expression hardened. He poured himself a drink and sat down like nothing was wrong. "You shouldn't go through my things," he said calmly. "These aren't just things, Daniel. You were planning to cut me out before you even had the money. You've been lying to me, using me." My voice cracked on the last words. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his whiskey slowly. "Elena, don't act shocked. You knew this life wasn't forever. You played your part, and now it's over." I felt my whole body tremble. "Played my part? I gave you everything. I put my life on hold for you." For the first time, his mask slipped, and his words came sharp, cold, without shame. "Yes. And it worked. You were useful when I needed you. But look at me now. Do you think I need a woman like you by my side anymore? I've outgrown you." The silence after that felt like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. Tears filled my eyes. but I refused to let them fall in front of him. "You see me as beneath you now?" I whispered. He smirked, finishing his drink. "I always knew you'd slow me down eventually. This is just reality." My heart broke in that moment, not just because of what he said, but because I realized the man I thought I married never truly existed. He had been wearing a mask all along. But just when I felt I had lost everything, life handed me something I didn't expect. A few days later, Daniel's father's lawyer called me privately. He said there was something I needed to see, something not shared during the will reading. When I arrived at the office, he handed me an envelope with my name on it, written in the old man's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter. "Elena," it began, "I want you to know that I saw you. I saw the way you stood by Daniel when no one else did. I saw the way you gave up pieces of yourself to lift him higher. I may not have said it enough, but I was grateful. More than you know." Tears blurred the page as I read on. He wrote that he worried about Daniel's pride, about the way money could twist him. He wanted to make sure I was protected. He had set up a trust fund in my name, hidden from Daniel, worth more than enough to give me independence for life. "Do not let anyone make you feel small," the letter ended. "You are stronger than even you realize." I pressed the paper to my chest and sobbed. For the first time in months, I felt seen, valued, loved. When I got home, Daniel was in the living room, bragging on the phone to someone about a new deal. I looked at him differently now. He thought he had all the power, that I was weak and trapped. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that his father had given me a way out, a way to stand tall. That night, I stood in front of him and said, "You think you've won, Daniel, but you don't know everything." He looked at me annoyed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked upstairs, clutching the letter close to me. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel broken. I felt strong. The power between us had shifted, and he didn't even realize it. And deep inside, I knew the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The day I decided to file for divorce, the air felt heavy but clear. I had cried enough. I had begged enough. Now it was time to act. I hired my own lawyer, a calm but fierce woman named Maya, who listened to me without judgment. She looked at the documents, at the letter from Daniel's father, and then she looked at me. "You're stronger than you think, Elena. We'll do this on your terms." Filing the papers wasn't easy. It felt like tearing the last thread of a life I had once cherished. But as soon as they were signed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. For once, I wasn't waiting on Daniel's approval. I wasn't living under his shadow. I was standing for myself. Daniel didn't take it well. At first he laughed. "You think you can win against me? Elena, I have the best lawyers money can buy. You'll walk away with nothing." But he underestimated me. The trust fund his father left me gave me the resources I needed. I didn't need his money. I didn't need his pity. And when the case went public, people started to see Daniel for who he really was. His arrogance, his reckless spending, his betrayal of business partners, it all came to light. His name began to make headlines, not for success, but for scandal. I didn't have to say much. I didn't fight with insults. I didn't chase after revenge. I simply told the truth, backed it with evidence, and let the world see him for what he had become. The calm way I carried myself made more noise than any shouting match could. When the divorce was finalized, I walked out of that courtroom with my head high. I wasn't the woman who had been crying in the kitchen months ago. I wasn't the wife begging her husband to love her. I was Elena, independent, dignified, free. Daniel, on the other hand, began to crumble. The more he tried to prove his power, the faster it slipped away. His reckless spending drained his accounts. Investors pulled out of his projects. Friends who once surrounded him disappeared when the money stopped flowing. The man who had called me beneath him was now drowning in the very wealth he thought would save him. As for me, I started to rebuild. Slowly, piece by piece, I put my life back together. My old friends reached out, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Maya, my lawyer, became more than just legal help. She became a mentor. She encouraged me to step into opportunities one had once been too afraid to try. I found work again, something meaningful that gave me a reason to get up each morning. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't tied to Daniel's world, but it was mine. My own effort, my own pride. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's shadow. I felt like myself. The scars didn't disappear overnight. There were still nights I lay awake remembering the coldness in Daniel's eyes, the way he had called me useful, and nothing more. But those memories no longer broke me. They reminded me of how far I had come, of what I would never allow again. One evening, I sat with a small group of friends at a cafe. We laughed about silly things, shared stories, and for the first time in a long time, I caught myself smiling without effort. My heart still carried wounds, but it was beating stronger now. I realized then that survival had turned into strength. I didn't just walk away from Daniel's betrayal. I walked into a new life where I owned my choices, my future, and my dignity. And while Daniel spiraled deeper into the sun was low when I walked through the quiet cemetery. The air was cool, and the world felt softer than it had in months. My steps slowed as I reached his grave, Daniel's father. The man who had seen me, truly seen me, when no one else did. I knelt down, brushing the dust off the stone with my hand. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. Then the words came, soft and trembling. "Thank you," I whispered. "You believed in me when your own son stopped. You gave me the strength to stand when I thought I couldn't." I closed my eyes and let the silence surround me. Memories of Daniel flickered in my mind. The man I once loved, the husband I thought would grow old with. But I knew now that I had lost him long before the divorce papers, long before the scandals. The man I married had disappeared the moment greed took hold of him. What I grieved wasn't the marriage, but the love that had died long before I walked away. I laid a small flower by the grave, my hand steady. "I'm free now," I said quietly. Not because of the money, not because of what Daniel lost, but because I found myself again. I won't let anyone make me feel small ever again. Standing up, I took one last look at the stone. The grief was still there, but it no longer chained me. It had turned into something else: strength, wisdom, freedom. As I walked out of the cemetery, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. My life was no longer tied to betrayal or to the shadows of what I had lost. It was tied to me, to the woman I had become. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud. I had been broken, but I wasn't destroyed. I had found Hey Besties. Thanks so much for watching till the end. Elena's husband inherited $450 million and thought he could destroy her, but she rose stronger, with dignity and freedom. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, strength, and empowerment, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and of course, subscribe for more amazing dramas. See you in the next one. Bye! Something far greater than money or status. I had found myself.